Europeanization is, of course, a concept which must play a role in this debates. What does Europeanization mean? It is an important category because it also relates to the question of collective identity and protection of identity, maintenance of identity, and ability to develop traditional identity, collective identity of nations, regions, and so on. What does Europeanization mean? In the discussions of the political future of the region of Central Europe, Central Eastern Europe, one important component of these debates was the question whether the region is returning to Europe or whether the region is marching towards Europe as an external, historically external entity to the membership of which we, as a region, we aspire. The concept of return to Europe was very popular. It was certainly very popular in Poland because it indicated that, first of all, historically, the region had belonged to Europe, and it was somehow an artificial division which separated from the rest of Europe. But also it shows that the concept demonstrated or tried to indicate that we deserved to be part of Europe and that we have the right to be accepted. Of course, we have to catch up in terms of development, but that our own heritage, our own past, our own historical traditions should be seen as European. And therefore, perhaps when we look at the historically shaped identity of the region, we should not think about it in terms of something to abandon, something to give up, something to reject, but rather something that needs to be seen as part of European tradition. Europeanization, in a very general sense, may be seen as a transition of the new regions or new countries into European standards, to European way of life, to European values. Europeanization may also be seen in more concrete terms by the process of transformation of political and legal systems and economic systems of the new members in such a way that they become compatible with the legal, political, and economic system of institutionalized, integrated Europe. So this is perhaps less problematic. It is simpler meaning of Europeanization. Simply to say that if you want to be a member of European Union, you have to change your law, you have to change your some of your political principles, you have to change much in your economic system in order to fit into the whole European system as such. That's not very, I mean, it's not always very easy, but it doesn't generate a problem of who we are and what we should or should not do, because clearly if you want to be a member of European Union, you have to make your law and your political and economic systems compatible with the rest. It's much more problematic when we think about values, about traditions, about culture and social issues, whether we should, as new members, as the region which is marching towards Europe as understood as European Union, whether we should open ourselves for new ideas, whether we should necessarily adapt to normative, axiological standards, to the way of life of the West, or whether we should see Europe as more diverse in this sense, whether we should be open to ideas regarding lifestyle and morality and family structure and relation between people, or whether we can say politically, economically, legally, we are one Europe, but when it comes to values, when it comes to traditions, when it comes to moral standards, when it comes to some elements of cultural heritage, we want to remain different. That's, of course, a very serious issue, because on the one hand, Europe is guided by the principle of unity and diversity, united in diversity. So we respect and we appreciate and we embrace all diversity. On the other hand, clearly there do exist standards, there do exist common values and common principles. Of course, individual human rights being the most important, the most prominent. The European Union has formally, legally accepted the Charter of Fundamental Rights as part of the treaty, the Lisbon Treaty. Therefore, one can say that Europe has already made a decision which values are the guiding values of the Union. Therefore, we may say that if anybody wants to become European or wants to be seen as European, they must respect this set of values as I said, as guiding principles. But of course, there is and there will be a lot of discussion regarding collective values vis-à-vis individual values, the Christian tradition, the tradition of the Enlightenment, the role of religion in society, and so on. Whether Central Eastern European region will be able to create its own collective identity in all this, in the midst of all this discussion, it remains to be seen. One has to remember that in spite of the common communist past, that of course unites the region and can be seen as a basis of collective identity, there is and has been a lot of cultural and historical differences between different parts of the region, and much of this difference is now clearly seen. There's also the question of familiarity and mutual trust. After the collapse of the Berlin Wall, after the disappearance of the Iron Curtain, it became clear that the two parts of Europe do not know each other very well, or if they do know each other, this knowledge was very general and not detailed, sufficiently detailed and sufficiently specific, and that there was very very low degree of familiarity, of feeling that we know each other, that we belong to one family of Europeans, especially knowledge among Western Europeans, knowledge of Eastern Europe was extremely limited. Knowledge among Eastern Europeans, knowledge of what Western Europe is, was perhaps much better, but also largely determined by stereotypical and overgeneralized views. There was much prejudice, there was a lot of fears of cultural domination, economic domination. In the West, there was much anxiety concerning the possible competition of a cheap labor force from the East, but also the feeling that those Eastern Europeans, perhaps as a society, as societies, might not be able to live up to the required Western European standards. So their increasing presence in Western societies was seen largely as an invasion of strangers in otherwise familiar social environment. On the other hand, people in Central Eastern Europe had a problem that they might not be able to compete with stronger and more advanced societies of the West, and that this competition may not be to their advantage, they may not be able to survive economically and culturally. So it still continues the process of getting to know each other, developing trust, developing a feeling of familiarity. It will probably be still a matter of some years to come before we can say that Eastern, Western, and Central Europe really has become one Europe, unity, and the former old divisions will disappear. Of course, this does not mean that we are able to solve immediately the problem of external relations with countries which are not now yet members of European Union. This is if we are able to solve these dilemmas and questions, it's certainly going to take much more time.